The woman of my brother wanted to steal the inheritance of our family and invest it in herself. Hi, everyone. I've been lurking here for a while, but I never thought I'd actually be posting. I'm Sarah, 31, the eldest child in what I'd call a typical, middle-class family. Growing up, my parents always emphasized the importance of hard work and independence, but there was always this one little asterisk in my life that set me apart: the trust fund. The trust fund was left to me by my grandfather, a man who spent his life building a modest fortune through years of grit and hard work. His stipulations for the trust were clear. I'd gain full access to it when I turned 35, or earlier if I used the money for school or to buy real estate. Grandpa was always big on the idea of using money wisely. He wanted it to serve a purpose. To this day, I've never touched that money. It feels like a safety net I don't want to fall back on unless absolutely necessary. I've worked my entire life, even though I know that money is sitting there. It's not a massive fortune, but it's enough to make a real difference, enough to buy a home outright or fund a few degrees. Then there's my brother Michael, who's 28. Michael's always been a bit of a charmer. Growing up, he was the golden boy, always able to talk his way out of trouble, always the favorite at family gatherings. Michael recently got engaged to Jessica, a woman from a very wealthy family. She's 30, sharp as a tack, and seems to know exactly what she wants out of life. I'll admit, when I first met Jessica, I was a little intimidated by her confidence and polished demeanor. She's the kind of woman who makes you feel underdressed no matter what you're wearing. At first, I was thrilled for Michael. He'd been dating Jessica for a couple of years, and their engagement felt like the natural next step. My parents were over the moon about it, partly because Jessica's family is, well, loaded. They own multiple properties and businesses, and their family name carries a certain weight in our community. Mom and Dad couldn't stop gushing about how Michael had hit the jackpot, but as much as I wanted to be happy for him, something about the whole situation felt off. Jessica seemed too perfect, too polished. And Michael, who's always been pretty independent, started changing in small but noticeable ways. He stopped talking about his own career goals and started parroting Jessica's plans instead, plans that always seemed to center around her family's interests. The first real red flag came during a family dinner shortly after their engagement. Jessica casually brought up my trust fund. "Sarah, you must be so excited to have that cushion," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "Have you thought about what you'll do with it when the time comes?" I was taken aback. I hadn't even told Jessica about the trust fund, so she must have heard about it from Michael. I gave her a vague answer about not having any immediate plans, but she didn't drop it. Over the course of the evening, she kept circling back to the topic, asking pointed questions about how much money was in the fund and what the conditions for accessing it were. My parents didn't seem to think anything of it. They were too busy basking in the glow of Michael's perfect fiancé. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica was prying for a reason. Why was she so interested in my financial situation? The next day, I called Michael to ask him about it. At first, he played dumb, but when I pressed him, he admitted that he'd told Jessica about the trust fund. "She's just curious, Sarah," he said dismissively. "It's not a big deal." But it felt like a big deal to me. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about Jessica's sudden interest in my inheritance didn't sit right. I started paying closer attention to the way she interacted with me, and the more I observed, the more uneasy I felt. A few weeks later, things escalated. Michael and Jessica invited me over to their place for dinner. Over dessert, Jessica brought up the idea of investing in a vacation property. "Michael and I have been thinking about buying a place upstate," she said casually. "Somewhere we could use as a rental property during the off-season. You know, an investment." I nodded along, wondering where this was going. "Actually," she continued, "we were thinking it could be a joint investment. You've got that trust fund, and we've got some capital to put toward it. It could be a great opportunity for all of us." I nearly choked on my coffee. Was she seriously suggesting I use my inheritance to buy property with her and Michael? I tried to laugh it off, saying I wasn't ready to make any big financial decisions. But Jessica was persistent. She started rattling off numbers and projections, painting a rosy picture of how much money we could make together. Michael, for his part, just sat there nodding along. It was like he'd been hypnotized. I left their place that night feeling angry and confused. Why were they so fixated on my trust fund? And why was Michael going along with it? He knew how I felt about that money. It wasn't something I took lightly. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice more cracks in Michael and Jessica's seemingly perfect relationship. Michael confided in me one night after a few beers that Jessica had been pressuring him to quit his job and join her family's business. "She says it'll be better for us in the long run," he told me, sounding defeated. but I don't know if it's what I want. I wanted to tell him to run, but I knew he wouldn't listen. Michael was head over heels for Jessica, and she had a way of making her ideas sound like the only logical choice. I tried to put some distance between myself and the situation, but it wasn't long before Jessica came back with another proposal. This time, she suggested that I use the trust fund to buy a house outright, one that she and Michael could live in until they were ready to buy their own place. Think of it as a loan, she said breezily. We'd pay you back, of course. I couldn't believe her audacity. This woman, who I barely knew, was trying to dictate how I should use my inheritance, all under the guise of helping her and Michael build a life together. I told her in no uncertain terms that I wasn't interested, but her reaction left me shaken. She didn't get angry or defensive. Instead, she smiled and said, "Well, think about it. I'm sure you'll come around." Dinner was supposed to be a casual family gathering, a chance to catch up and celebrate Michael and Jessica's engagement. My parents had pulled out all the stops: Mom's famous pot roast, Dad's favorite wine, the good china that only saw daylight on special occasions. Jessica arrived with her usual polished charm, dressed to perfection in a sleek navy dress that made me feel underdressed in my jeans and sweater. Michael followed close behind her, looking nervous but trying to play it cool. Everything was pleasant at first. We talked about mundane things: the weather, Michael's job, and a funny story my mom had heard at work. Then Jessica, with her practiced grace, steered the conversation into murkier waters. "You know, we've been thinking about the wedding," she said, resting her manicured hand on Michael's arm. "It's going to be a beautiful day, but we want to make sure it's done right. A once-in-a-lifetime celebration." Her tone was casual, but I felt a slight chill creep up my spine. I nodded politely, not sure where she was going with this. Michael smiled but avoided my gaze, which only added to my unease. Jessica continued, her eyes locking onto mine like a predator eyeing prey. "We've been looking at venues, and there's this incredible place in Napa. It's everything we could ever want: elegant, intimate, and perfect for a family celebration." "That sounds lovely," my mom chimed in, already enchanted by the idea. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but insistent. "It's a bit on the pricier side, though. With catering, flowers, and everything else, we're looking at about $150,000. But it's worth it for something so special, don't you think?" I froze, realizing too late that I'd walked right into her trap. She didn't wait for anyone to respond before adding, "That's why we thought it might be a wonderful opportunity for Sarah to contribute. It's a family wedding, after all." The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. My father cleared his throat, and my mother's smile faltered. Jessica kept her gaze fixed on me, waiting for an answer. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I wasn't about to let myself be cornered. "I don't think that's something I can do," I said carefully, forcing a polite smile. "The trust fund isn't really meant for that kind of expense." Jessica's expression didn't change, but her tone shifted, becoming slightly sharper. "It's not just an expense, it's an investment in the family. A wedding like this would bring us all closer together." "I understand that," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But the trust fund has specific conditions. I can't just use it however I want." At that moment, Michael finally spoke up. "Come on, Sarah. It's not like you'd be blowing it all. It's for the family." I stared at him, incredulous. "Michael, it's not about that. It's about what Grandpa intended the money for. He wanted it to be used wisely." Jessica jumped back in, her voice smooth but insistent. "What could be wiser than supporting your brother's future? We're not just talking about the wedding either. We've been looking at houses, and there's a perfect one near my parents. It's $800,000, but with your help, we could make it work." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she seriously asking me to fund their entire future? I glanced at my parents, hoping for backup, but they both looked conflicted. Mom finally broke the silence. "Well, Sarah," she said hesitantly, "Jessica does have a point. Families should help each other." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Mom, are you serious? This is my inheritance we're talking about. It's not just sitting there waiting to be spent." Dad chimed in, his tone placating. "No one's saying you have to spend it all, honey. But think about how much it could help Michael and Jessica get started." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were all ganging up on me, as if my responsibility as a sister outweighed my own future. I looked at Michael, hoping he'd step in and diffuse the situation, but he just sat there, looking embarrassed but saying nothing. "I'm sorry," I said finally, my voice trembling, "but I can't do that. The trust fund isn't for weddings or houses. It's for my future." Jessica's smile tightened, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "Well, it's your decision," she said, her tone icy. "But I hope you'll reconsider. This is about more than just money. It's about family." The rest of the evening was excruciating. Conversation limped along, but the tension in the room was palpable. I left as soon as I could, barely able to say goodbye without my voice cracking. In the days that followed, things only got worse. Jessica started dropping hints to other family members about my unwillingness to support Michael. My parents began bringing up the wedding and the house in every conversation, trying to guilt me into changing my mind. Michael barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was strained and awkward. I felt like I was being painted as the villain in my own family. Jessica, meanwhile, played the role of the gracious, patient fiancée, constantly framing her demands as opportunities for the family to come together. It was infuriating, but I didn't know how to fight back without making things worse. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between Jessica and my mom. They didn't know I was nearby, and I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but their voices carried through the hallway. Jessica was saying, "I don't understand why Sarah's being so selfish. It's not like she earned that money. She's just sitting on it while we're trying to build a future." I felt my blood boil. How dare she act like my inheritance was up for grabs? I wanted to march in there and confront her, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Jessica was too skilled at manipulating people, and my parents were already under her spell. I've never felt so alone. My own family is turning against me, and I don't know how to make them see reason. All I know is that I can't let Jessica, or anyone else, bully me into giving up what's rightfully mine. But the more I stand my ground, the more isolated I feel. It's like I'm losing my family, one argument at a time. Things went downhill faster than I could have imagined. Jessica, who I'd initially thought was just pushy and a little overbearing, revealed just how relentless she could be. Not a week went by without her finding a way to bring up my trust fund. Each time, her demands grew bolder and her tactics more manipulative. The most brazen moment came during another dinner at my parents' house. This time, it wasn't just a suggestion or a nudge. Jessica turned to me, all smiles, and said, "Sarah, Michael and I have been thinking about a way to keep things simple. Instead of trying to figure out the wedding budget or the house separately, what if you gave us $200,000 as a wedding gift? That way, we could handle everything ourselves." I couldn't believe the words coming out of her mouth. "A wedding gift?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "Jessica, that's not a gift. That's a massive amount of money. It's not something I can just hand over." Jessica's smile didn't falter, but there was a steely edge to her tone as she replied, "But it would solve so many problems. You wouldn't have to worry about anything else. And it's not like you'd be spending all of the trust fund, just a part of it." I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Jessica, I've already explained this. The trust fund isn't just sitting there for random expenses. It's for my future." Jessica tilted her head, her smile growing tighter. "Your future? Sarah, you're 31. You've had plenty of time to figure out your future. Don't you think it's time to use the money for something meaningful?" Before I could respond, Michael jumped in. "Come on, Sarah. It's not like she's asking for the whole thing. This is about family." And just like that, I found myself outnumbered again. My parents, who had been listening quietly until now, exchanged a glance before my dad cleared his throat. "You know, Sarah, maybe Jessica has a point. It's a big ask, sure, but weddings are about family coming together. Maybe there's a way to compromise." "Compromise?" I said, my voice shaking. "Dad, this isn't a compromise. This is them asking me to give up my inheritance for their wedding." My mom chimed in, her tone soothing but no less frustrating. "Honey, we're just saying it might be worth considering. Think about how much it would mean to Michael and Jessica." I wanted to scream. How could they not see what was happening? Jessica wasn't just asking for money. She was trying to guilt me into giving up my future for her benefit. I left dinner that night feeling angrier and more isolated than ever. It didn't stop there. A few days later, my parents called a family meeting. I should have known it wasn't going to be a neutral discussion, but I went anyway, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd listen to reason. Instead, I walked into an ambush. My mom started the meeting with a strained smile. "Sarah, we wanted to talk about the trust fund situation. We know it's been a point of tension lately, and we think it's important to find a solution that works for everyone." "What solution?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "Well," my dad said, his voice heavy, "we were thinking that maybe the best thing to do would be to divide the inheritance now. That way, there wouldn't be any confusion or hard feelings later." I stared at him, stunned. Divide the inheritance? Dad, it's not a family pot. It's my trust fund. Grandpa left it to me. I know that, sweetheart, he said, clearly uncomfortable. But it's also part of the family legacy. Maybe it's time to think about the bigger picture. The bigger picture? I repeated, my voice rising. You mean Jessica's picture? Because that's all this is about. Sarah, my mom said gently, Jessica and Michael are part of this family. We need to support each other. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own parents were trying to guilt me into giving up my inheritance to appease Jessica. It felt like a betrayal on a level I couldn't even process. Jessica, of course, wasn't content to let the family meeting stay private. A few days later, I started noticing cryptic posts on her social media. It's so sad when family puts money above relationships, one post read, accompanied by a photo of her and Michael looking sad but resolute. Another post said, sometimes greed tears families apart, but love will always win in the end. It didn't take long for those posts to start circulating among our extended family. My cousin Lisa called me, her voice full of concern. Sarah, what's going on? Jessica's been posting these things, and people are talking. Are you really refusing to help Michael? Lisa, you don't understand, I said, my voice shaking with frustration. This isn't about helping Michael. It's about Jessica trying to take advantage of me. But it didn't matter what I said. The damage was done. Relatives who barely knew me were suddenly weighing in, calling me selfish and accusing me of hoarding money that could help the family. Every time I checked my phone, there was another message or comment, each one more hurtful than the last. Even people I thought I could trust turned on me. My Aunt Susan, who'd always been supportive, called to tell me I should do the right thing and help Michael and Jessica. It's not about the money, Sarah, she said. It's about family. Don't let something as trivial as money ruin your relationships. Trivial? I snapped. A $200,000 wedding gift is trivial? Well, maybe not trivial, she conceded. But it's not worth losing your family over. I wanted to scream. How could they not see what was happening? Jessica was manipulating everyone, turning them against me, and no one seemed to care. It was like I was trapped in some twisted game, and no matter what I did, I was the villain. The worst part was that it started affecting my relationships outside the family. Friends who saw Jessica's posts began asking me questions, subtly hinting that they thought I was being unreasonable. Even at work, I felt like people were looking at me differently, though I couldn't be sure if it was just paranoia or if the gossip had spread that far. I felt completely alone. My own family had turned against me, and Jessica was orchestrating it all with a smile on her face. Every time I thought things couldn't get worse, she found a new way to twist the knife. I'd reached my breaking point. Between Jessica's constant demands, my family's pressure, and the whispers from extended relatives, I felt trapped. I needed clarity, and more importantly, I needed protection. After another sleepless night, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Her name was Rebecca Crane, and she came highly recommended by a friend who'd gone through a messy estate dispute. Rebecca was in her late 40s, with a sharp, no-nonsense demeanor that instantly made me feel like I was in capable hands. I sat in her office, spilling the whole story. Jessica's audacity, the family meetings, the social media posts, everything. Rebecca listened intently, her pen gliding across a notepad as she made detailed notes. When I finally finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Sarah, let me start by reassuring you, she said. Your trust fund is legally protected. No one, not Jessica, not your parents, not anyone, can access it without your explicit consent. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment. That's great to hear, I said, but Jessica isn't the type to give up easily. She's already turned half my family against me. What's stopping her from trying something else? Rebecca nodded, her face serious. You're right to be cautious. People like Jessica don't just back down. But the law is on your side. The trust fund has strict conditions, and unless you personally choose to allocate money, it's untouchable. However, I'd recommend keeping a close eye on your financial accounts. If she's as manipulative as you say, she may try other methods to get what she wants. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it made perfect sense. Jessica had already shown how far she was willing to go. As I left Rebecca's office, I felt a mix of relief and unease. The trust fund might be safe, but that didn't mean Jessica would stop. A few days later, I noticed something strange. My best friend, Lily, called me out of the blue, sounding unusually hesitant. Hey Sarah, she began. I don't know how to say this, but did you know Jessica's been asking people about your finances? My stomach dropped. What do you mean? She reached out to me, Lily said, her voice uneasy. She was really casual about it, just saying she wanted to get a better understanding of the family's financial situation since you're all so close. But she started asking specific questions, like how much money you have in your accounts and if you've ever mentioned using the trust fund. I felt a wave of anger and embarrassment. What did you tell her? Nothing, Lily said quickly. I shut her down immediately. But, Sarah, it was weird. She made it sound like it was about family planning or budgeting, but it felt off. It wasn't just Lily. Over the next week, I heard similar stories from 2 other friends and even a distant cousin. Jessica was systematically trying to dig into my finances, using whatever flimsy justification she could think of. It was both invasive and deeply unsettling. The final straw came when I got a call from my bank. A representative informed me that someone had attempted to access my account using my personal information but had failed to provide the correct security answers. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. Jessica was trying to break into my accounts. I immediately called Rebecca, who advised me to strengthen all my account protections and file a report with the bank. This is crossing a serious line, she said. If she tries anything else, we may need to take legal action. I felt violated, but I wasn't surprised. Jessica had proven time and again that she had no boundaries. What did surprise me was what I learned next. One evening, as I was combing through old emails and texts to gather evidence, I got a message from someone I didn't recognize. The sender introduced herself as Rachel, and her message was straightforward. Hi, Sarah. I'm sorry to contact you out of the blue, but I think we need to talk about Jessica. I used to be engaged to her. I stared at the message, my heart racing. Was this a prank? I couldn't imagine why someone from Jessica's past would reach out to me, but my curiosity got the better of me. I replied, and we set up a call. Rachel's voice was calm, but carried an undercurrent of bitterness. I was engaged to Jessica about 5 years ago, she began. We met through mutual friends, and at first, everything was perfect. She was charming, ambitious, and made me feel like the luckiest person in the world. What happened? I asked, already dreading the answer. It started small, Rachel said. She'd make little comments about my finances, asking how much I made and if I had any savings. At the time, I thought it was normal. She framed it as us planning our future together. But then she started pushing me to make investments for us. She wanted me to buy a house in my name and pay for the renovations. She said it was for our future, but it always felt like I was the one making all the sacrifices. The parallels to my own situation were chilling. Did she ever stop? No, Rachel said bluntly. When I finally started saying no, things got ugly. She turned my friends against me, made me feel like I was being selfish and ungrateful. When I found out she'd been trying to access my financial accounts behind my back, that was the last straw. I ended the engagement. I felt a wave of nausea. Jessica's behavior wasn't just manipulative, it was a pattern. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I've seen the way she operates, Rachel said. I don't know the specifics of your situation, but if she's anything like she was with me, you need to be careful. She doesn't stop until she gets what she wants. The call left me shaken but determined. Jessica wasn't just a manipulative fiancée. She was a predator, and I was her latest target. Armed with Rachel's story and Rebecca's legal advice, I began to document everything. Every text, every email, every interaction that hinted at Jessica's schemes went into a folder. I wasn't going to let her win. I couldn't stand by any longer. Jessica's attempts to infiltrate my finances, manipulate my family, and turn my life upside down had crossed every imaginable line. It wasn't just frustrating anymore. It was unbearable. After consulting with Rebecca, my lawyer, we decided to send a formal cease and desist notice to Jessica, addressing her harassment and public defamation. Rebecca assured me this was the right step to take, both legally and emotionally. The letter was direct, professional, and terrifying in its clarity. Rebecca outlined Jessica's attempts to gain unauthorized access to my accounts, her incessant manipulation of family members to coerce me into sharing my inheritance, and her defamatory posts on social media. The letter warned her to immediately stop her behavior or face potential legal consequences. The fallout was swift. 2 days after the letter was delivered, Michael called me, his voice a mix of anger and desperation. What the hell, Sarah? He demanded. Why would you send Jessica a legal letter? She's part of this family. Michael, I said, struggling to keep my composure. This has gone too far. Jessica has been harassing me, trying to access my bank accounts, and spreading lies about me online. I had no choice. She's not spreading lies. Michael snapped. She's just telling people how hurt she is. Do you have any idea how much stress this has caused her? How much stress you've caused her? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Michael, are you even listening to yourself? Jessica has been trying to steal from me. She's turned the whole family against me, and now you're defending her? You don't get it, he said, his voice cracking. She's my fiancée. I have to stand by her. Rebecca had warned me that something like this might happen. Jessica was the type of person who would escalate rather than back down. Sure enough, the next day, I received notice that Jessica and Michael were threatening to sue me for emotional distress. The claim was ridiculous. Rebecca assured me they had no legal basis, but it was still infuriating. They were trying to use scare tactics to pressure me into giving in. They're bluffing, Rebecca said when I called her in a panic. They have no case. Emotional distress claims are incredibly hard to prove, especially when you've done nothing wrong. Stay calm, and don't engage with them directly. Let me handle this. But staying calm was easier said than done. My parents, who were already frustrated with the situation, were furious when they found out about the cease and desist letter and the potential lawsuit. Sarah, this is tearing the family apart. My mom said during yet another tense phone call. You need to find a way to make peace with Jessica and Michael. Make peace. I repeated, my voice rising. Mom, they're trying to sue me. How am I supposed to make peace with that? By being the bigger person, she said firmly. This isn't just about you, Sarah. This is about family. I hung up, seething. It was like talking to a brick wall. My parents couldn't, or wouldn't, see Jessica for who she really was. They were so blinded by their desire for family harmony that they were willing to ignore her lies and manipulation. And then, by sheer dumb luck, everything changed. It happened during one of those dreaded family group chats. Michael sent a message, presumably intended for Jessica, but he accidentally sent it to the entire group instead. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was just a series of screenshots. But as I started reading, my heart stopped. The screenshots were of a conversation between Michael and Jessica, and they were damning. In one message, Jessica had written, "This isn't about love. It's about making sure we're set up for life. If Sarah won't share the inheritance willingly, we'll make her." In another, she said, "Once we have access to the money, we can start thinking about what's next. But I'm not going to let her hoard it while we struggle." My blood ran cold. There it was, in black and white. Proof that Jessica's entire relationship with Michael, and by extension, her entire campaign against me, was based on greed and self-interest. She wasn't just manipulative. She was calculating, cold, and entirely devoid of genuine affection for my brother or anyone else. The group chat exploded. My mom, who had been Jessica's staunchest defender, wrote, "Michael, what is this? Is this a joke?" Michael didn't respond immediately, but Jessica did. "Those messages are fake," she wrote. "Sarah must have made them up to turn you all against me." It was a laughable defense. Everyone in the group could see the timestamps and the fact that the messages came from Michael's number. My dad, who had been silent for most of the ordeal, finally weighed in. "Michael, you need to explain this. Now." Michael tried to backtrack, claiming the messages were taken out of context, but it was too late. The damage was done. My parents were furious. My extended family was horrified, and even some of Jessica's staunchest supporters began to distance themselves. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't alone. The truth was out, and Jessica's web of lies was unraveling. But even as she faced backlash from the family, I knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. After the family chat incident, Jessica's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. For days, I received calls and messages from relatives, some apologizing for doubting me, others expressing their shock at what they'd learned. My parents, who had defended Jessica for so long, were especially shaken. My mom called me in tears, apologizing profusely for not believing me sooner. "I can't believe we let it get this far," she said, her voice trembling. "Sarah, we're so sorry. We just wanted to keep the family together, but we were wrong." It was a relief to finally hear those words, but the damage had already been done. My relationship with my family would take time to repair, and I wasn't sure I could ever fully forgive them for siding with Jessica in the first place. Jessica, meanwhile, went into damage control mode. Her first move was to file for a court injunction, claiming that I was harassing her. It was an absurd accusation, but it was clear she was trying to flip the narrative and paint herself as the victim. Rebecca handled the situation with her usual calm professionalism, filing a counterclaim and providing ample evidence of Jessica's harassment and defamation against me. The court quickly saw through Jessica's tactics, and her injunction request was dismissed. The legal battle, however, wasn't the end of her troubles. Shortly after the court's decision, Jessica's social media accounts disappeared entirely. At first, I thought she had deleted them to avoid further scrutiny, but then I learned the truth. Multiple people, including Rachel, Jessica's former fiancée, had come forward with stories about her manipulative behavior. They shared screenshots, emails, and messages that exposed her pattern of using people for financial gain. Her online presence became a magnet for criticism, and the backlash was swift and brutal. Jessica's reputation was in tatters. Her carefully curated image of sophistication and grace was replaced by a public perception of greed and dishonesty. She became a social pariah, and even her wealthy connections began to distance themselves from her. Michael, for his part, was caught in the fallout. For weeks, he tried to salvage their relationship, clinging to the idea that they could move past everything. But the cracks in their relationship were too deep to ignore. One evening, he showed up at my door, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. "Can we talk?" I let him in, unsure of what to expect. He sat on my couch, his head in his hands, and for the first time in months, he seemed like the brother I used to know. "I don't even know where to start," he said finally. "I've been so blind. I thought I was doing the right thing, standing by Jessica, but now I see how wrong I was." His words were sincere, but I couldn't let go of the months of pain he'd caused me. "Michael, you didn't just stand by Jessica," I said, my voice firm. "You helped her. You defended her while she tried to destroy me." He nodded, his eyes brimming with tears. "I know. I see that now. She manipulated me, Sarah. She made me believe that if I didn't support her, I'd lose her. And I was so afraid of that, I didn't stop to think about what it was doing to you. I wanted to stay angry, to make him feel the weight of what he'd done. But seeing him so broken made it hard to hold on to my resentment." "Michael," I said softly, "you have to understand how much this hurt me. You're my brother. I trusted you." "I know," he said, his voice cracking. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you, if you'll let me." We talked for hours that night, hashing out everything that had happened. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had my brother back. He admitted that Jessica's behavior had started to scare him, especially after the family chat debacle. "She was furious when those messages leaked," he said. "But instead of apologizing or trying to fix things, she blamed me. She said I'd ruined everything." It was clear that their relationship was hanging by a thread, and it didn't take long for it to snap completely. A few days later, Jessica packed her bags and left. She didn't even say goodbye to Michael, just left a terse note saying she couldn't be with someone who didn't stand up for her. The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. In the weeks that followed, Michael and I slowly began to rebuild our relationship. He moved back into our parents' house temporarily, and we started spending more time together. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension and unresolved hurt, but we were making progress. Jessica, on the other hand, seemed to vanish. With her social media accounts gone and her reputation in ruins, she disappeared from our lives entirely. I heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to a different city, but no one knew for sure. Part of me was relieved to be rid of her, but another part couldn't help but wonder if she was plotting her next scheme. As for me, I finally felt like I could breathe again. The trust fund remained untouched, protected not just by legal safeguards, but by the knowledge that I had the strength to stand up for myself. My relationship with my family was far from perfect, but it was healing, one conversation at a time. After Jessica left, there was an eerie quiet in our family. It was like we were all trying to process what had happened, each of us in our own way. My parents were the first to reach out, but their attempts at reconciliation felt hesitant and unsure. They invited me to dinner one evening, and while I considered declining, I ultimately agreed. I knew that if we were ever going to move forward, we needed to address everything openly. The dinner was awkward at first. My mom fussed over the table settings, clearly trying to distract herself from the tension, while my dad kept clearing his throat as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, after we'd eaten, my mom put down her fork and looked at me with teary eyes. "Sarah," she began, her voice trembling, "we owe you an apology. A big one. We were wrong to take Jessica's side, and we were wrong to pressure you the way we did. I don't know how we let things get so out of hand." I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to believe her, but the wounds were still fresh. "Why did you do it?" I asked finally, my voice calm but firm. "Why did you side with her over me?" My dad sighed heavily. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said. "Jessica had a way of making everything sound reasonable. She made us believe that helping Michael and her would bring the family closer. But we see now that it was all manipulation. We let you down and we're sorry." Their words felt sincere, but I knew I couldn't let myself fall back into the same patterns. I appreciate the apology, I said carefully, but things can't go back to the way they were. I need to set boundaries, for my sake. My mom nodded, her eyes still glistening. We understand, Sarah. We just hope that, in time, we can rebuild your trust. The boundaries I set were firm but fair. We agreed to limit discussions about money or family drama, and I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate any attempts to pressure me again. It wasn't an easy conversation, but it felt like a step in the right direction. With the family drama finally settling, I turned my attention to my future. For years, I dreamed of starting my own business, a small boutique focused on handmade and sustainable goods. It was a passion project I'd put on the back burner for too long, and now, with the trust fund intact, I finally had the means to make it happen. I found the perfect location, a charming storefront in a bustling part of town. It wasn't cheap, $500,000 for the apartment above the shop, but it felt right. It was an investment not just in a business, but in myself. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was making decisions based on my own wants and needs, not someone else's expectations. The process of setting up the boutique was exhilarating and nerve-wracking. I worked with a local interior designer named Claire, who quickly became a close friend. Claire was everything I needed at that moment: creative, supportive, and endlessly positive. She helped me turn the empty storefront into a cozy, inviting space filled with warmth and character. Opening day was a blur of emotions. Friends, supportive family members, and even a few curious strangers stopped by to see the shop. My parents came too, bringing a bouquet of flowers and looking genuinely proud. It was a small but meaningful gesture, and it reminded me that while our relationship still had its challenges, they were trying. Meanwhile, my extended family rallied around me in unexpected ways. My cousin Lisa, who had been one of the first to defend me during the Jessica ordeal, organized a family gathering to celebrate my new venture. She was careful to invite only those who had supported me, and it turned into a heartwarming reunion. For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me. Michael didn't attend the gathering, and while it felt strange not having him there, it was probably for the best. He'd reached out to me a few times since Jessica left, apologizing again and trying to rebuild our relationship. I was willing to forgive him, but I wasn't ready to fully trust him yet. I needed time to heal, and I needed him to prove that he'd changed. As for Jessica, she was completely out of the picture. The last I heard, she had moved to another city and was trying to reinvent herself, but her reputation had taken a serious hit. Stories about her manipulative behavior had spread far and wide, and even people who had once been her friends were keeping their distance. It was a fitting end for someone who had caused so much pain and chaos. Life after the conflict wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I poured my energy into the boutique, watching it grow little by little. Customers loved the personal touches I put into every detail, from the handmade displays to the carefully curated inventory. The shop became more than just a business. It became a reflection of everything I'd been through and everything I'd overcome.